Hi, everyone. Welcome to K-12 Social Studies Standards Info Session. I'm here with some great colleagues, but I'm going to introduce myself first. I'm Tony Roy, President, Connecticut Council for the Social Studies, and I'm also a Social Studies classroom teacher for Bloomfield Public Schools. Steve, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Sure. Steve Armstrong, Social Studies Consultant, Connecticut State Department of Ed, past President, National Council for the Social Studies. And Jenny, how about you?
Hi, I'm Jenny Hicula Diaz. I also go by JHD, and I'm the Connecticut Council for the Social Studies Professional Learning Coordinator.
Start us off there, Steve.
Sure. Some of you, or probably most of you, remember back to 2015 when the Connecticut State Frameworks came out. Now, just so you know, this was the first document of any state frameworks or standards. It was right after the C3 came in. And so our document back in 2015 was heavily influenced by the C3. And thus the emphasis of inquiry in the document. We didn't in the document, and this was intentional, we recommended content and themes, but not specific content. I mean, again, I would say we recommended themes. We recommended if you want to do it chronologically, here's where you could go. If you want to do it thematically, here's where you could go. But we really didn't recommend in that 2015 document specific content to be taught. Going along with the C3 and inquiry, we suggested compelling questions. You know, the emphasis of starting lessons and starting inquiries with compelling questions. And I'll tell you that we got quite a bit of national and regional praise for that 2015 document. There were at least 6 states that called and asked if we could use, as they're doing curriculum framework or standard work, if they could use our work as a model for that. So in 2015, that was a work that got some praise. What's happened since? Well, why do we have to change? What's wrong with the frameworks? Well, first off, we've gotten requests from educators at all levels, but I think especially at the elementary school level, that they would like more specific content in the document. That they thought the frameworks were perhaps too general. So that is a reason why we have re-looked at those 2015 frameworks. Teachers want to be validated for good work, and especially in the area of civics. And we wanted to create a document that validates good teaching, that evaluates, that gives value to inquiry instruction. And we've taken a hard look at that as we've created the new standards. There were also from a Fordham report suggested some content revisions. They suggested some structural revisions, but more than that, they suggested more specificity in content. And when the legislation was passed by the General Assembly that talked about a model curriculum that had specific curriculum parameters to the document as outlined by the General Assembly, this was another reason to have a new document that digs into content in a little more detail. So those are reasons why since 2015, there was a move to create a new document, and we think a better document than that 2015 document. And just so you know that, I mean, here are the things in Public Act 21-2. Here are the things that got specific mention that we have to do in social studies. By the way, we're not the only group that has to do a model curriculum. All of the disciplines have to create a model curriculum, the major disciplines. But what we have to focus on specifically economic principles, climate change, civics and citizenship, racism, and then specific content topics that the legislation said had to be in our document appropriately. Native American studies, Asian American Pacific Islander studies, LGBTQ plus studies, and information so students could study the experience and the history of American veterans. So we have, in our standards, we have to represent this. These groups are all, and these topics are all represented, well represented in the standards. But so there's the sort of, the model curriculum is sort of the practical application of the social studies standards at the K-8 level.
Connecticut Council for the Social Studies was very fortunate that the Connecticut State Department of Education reached out to our organization to help lead the standards project. As Steve was just saying just a moment ago, the model curriculum is the thing that's really driving the standards, but we felt that you couldn't have a good model curriculum without a solid base of standards from which to build upon. So this is the organization structure that we established in partnership with the Connecticut State Department of Ed. You'll notice that we had some project associates. These were folks that were basically team leaders, a professional learning coordinator, which is Jenny. You have been introduced to them already. And then we have research assistants who were folks that helped us do the initial findings in terms of what was already happening in state standards, and also doing some surveys, which I'll talk about a little bit later, to help us figure out what exactly should be in the standards document. You'll see here a list of names of folks that played in each one of these roles, but I also wanted to take a moment just to identify people that are part of the Social Studies Investment Partnership, right? The organizations, we have Connecticut Council for the Social Studies and Connecticut State Department of Ed, but also the Connecticut Democracy Center and Connecticut Humanities are providing support for this program and in this project, this investment. We also brought on several consultants to provide guidance on the standards writing and assist with continuity. In addition to the groups that were listed by Steve a while back in terms of what was required by the model curriculum legislation, we also brought in a consultant for African American Black Studies and a consultant for Puerto Rican Latino Studies, because we wanted to make sure that all of these groups were represented, even if they weren't represented in the Public Act 21-2. So what was our task? Really, our task had to do with putting content into Dimension 2. So you'll see this is the inquiry arc that you're looking at here. Dimension 1, 3, and 4 is something that we did look at, but most of our attention, again, was placed onto Dimension 2, the disciplinary concepts and tools. Here's a little bit of the timeline. This project started all the way back in October 2021 with the steering committee. That's when we started to research different types of standards. That's where the research associates came in to help us out. This is when we started to build the guiding principles, which I'll get into a little bit later. And we did a lot of stakeholder work. We looked at surveys and focus groups. And then finally, right around February or early March of 2022, we adopted the guiding principles. The steering committee adopted the guiding principles, and we started writing right around May 14 of 2022. We worked all through the summer. The project associates, the folks that were basically the team leaders, they led teams as they worked in tandem. K to 2 worked as a team, 3 to 5 worked as a team, 6 to 8 worked as a team, 9 to 12 worked as a team, and these curriculum were being developed simultaneously through the summer. I went through several iteration processes. So basically, we wrote a draft, and then we kicked it over to the research associates and our lead editor. They would do some work with that editing, and then it would come back to the writing teams, and they would work on revising and getting it ready to be submitted by the end of August. I can tell you that over 100 people participated, educators participated in this project. That's classroom teachers, as well as curriculum leaders and district administrators as well. So we had a really wide range of experience in terms of professional experience, but also represented many different areas of Connecticut, urban, rural, suburban, to make sure that we just had as much diversity as possible. And then finally, we started the last process of finishing off the standards. We started that in December of 2022, and then we finally were able to turn in the draft standards, the 6th draft of the standards, May 17th of 2022, or excuse me, 2023. And this professional learning continues into the summer and through the next school year. And we're expecting, and I think Steve could speak to this a little bit better than I could, we're expecting that the standards that will come up for review by the Connecticut State Department of Ed in September of 2023 for next school year. Steve, did you want to comment on that a little bit?
Yeah, just also, I would say a positive step 17 was that the after the Connecticut Council turned their standards in, there was a meeting of the initial State Department of Ed web review team, you know, people here at the State Department of Ed, and that the standards were very, very well received. That's a critical point, that the first step, where the standards are as we speak here in mid-June, is the standards are right now in the hands of the commissioner. But as Tony said, just to reiterate the thought at this end, and I can't imagine a reason it wouldn't happen, is the standards will go to the State Board of Education in their September meeting. And I'm predicting that we'll have a fairly smooth sailing at that meeting.
A little bit more about the stakeholder input. I think this is one of the pillars that kind of holds up the work that we've been doing. We did a lot of stakeholder input. We surveyed folks. We had over 300 people participate in the guiding principle survey. We did obviously a steering committee, which had 45 people represented there. And then we also had focus groups. And each one of these ways of having stakeholder input really led to the guiding principles. And what we were looking for is information on content, the standard specificity, the content priorities, and also what are the professional learning needs to be able to roll out the standards. Through the writing process, I do want to also mention that there were 2 rounds of public review on the standards. So we put them up onto the CCSS website. And we allowed people to review each individual standard. You could go in and comment on each individual standard just to help us bring the standards over the finish line. Just really quickly, I'm on the guiding principles. If you'd like to scan for access, you can do that now. The guiding principles really were the blueprint, if you will, for the standards document. And really they outlined what structure they would face. So how would it look K to 12? Also, you know, how would it be broken out in terms of discipline of social studies and dimension of inquiry? There was several pieces about diversity and representation, the importance of content and knowledge, and then finally the skills that are developed throughout the standards. And again, the guiding principles really was the foundation from which the standards document was developed. Jenny?
And along with the guiding principles were the content themes of justice, representation, inclusivity, global context, agency, and local connections. And these are important because they guided and oriented educators as they develop standards and grade band cohorts. And also you might note that these themes go hand in hand with the legislative mandates that were mentioned before. That focus on courses and integration into courses, learning about historically excluded communities in both local and on both local and global stages to enhance student content knowledge, skills, and most importantly, equip young people to take informed action. This was already shown to you, the inquiry arc. Again, we're focusing in on dimension 2, so thinking like a historian, an economist, a geographer, and a political scientist. So zooming into that purple dimension 2 with the light bulb, applying disciplinary concepts and tools. This is our focus is on students understanding these 4 disciplines within social studies: history, economics, geography, and civics. And zooming into each of those, you can see, for example, under history, students understand change, continuity, and context. They understand perspectives. They understand historical sources and evidence, and they understand causation and argumentation. So putting all of those pieces together now, if you look in the white box, you see at the top that inquiry arc. You see the inquiry arc broken up on the left-hand side into the 4 dimensions. Zooming into that purple box of dimension 2, think like a historian, an economist, a geographer, and a political scientist, and then seeing the breaking off of those 4 disciplines within there to get at the content for the standards. We will look at some standards today, so focusing on the coding system so that you can understand how they're organized. The inquiry standards, which we won't spend time on today, but if you look back at this document, you can see, look at the circled part or the oval, 5-point Inc. Point 3, point A. The 5 tells you the grade level or the course. Inc. tells you that it's an inquiry standard. 3 tells you the inquiry dimension aligned with the C3 framework, and A tells you the inquiry skill indicator. Today we'll be looking at content standards. So same thing, we have a coding system, so it's easy to see how they fit together. Looking at the circled part, you see 5.civ, point 3, point A. 5 being, again, the grade level. Civ being the disciplinary lens, in this case civics. 4 being the skill number aligned with the C3 framework, and A being the order of appearance.
Just real quick, I'd like to jump in, Jenny. If you look at the standard, you'll see here that there's a set of EGs. These are content suggestions, and many standards, in fact, most standards have content suggestions that go along with the content standard. And again, just to reiterate what Jenny just said, each of the content standards is aligned directly to a skill in the C3. There we go. All right, Steve.
Just so you can see what grade and what expectations there are for each grade. And I would make the thought that I really hope that these standards, these new standards, will help enhance the teaching of social studies at the elementary school level. You know, this is a long-lasting, from my end, a problem that social studies has really gotten short shift at the elementary level. And really, really, really that, you know, I've heard elementary folks say, well, we need a model. Well, you know what? We're starting with a model right here. And so, you know, I think even if social studies is taught in conjunction with, say, language arts, well, we have to bring a good set of standards to that process. You know, this isn't teaching language arts with social studies on the side. Here's what we want social studies to be at the elementary level, and with substantial time, maybe time with another discipline, but with substantial time. And here's what we're suggesting. So real quickly, you could see that understanding my communities, you know, what are you? And then in kindergarten and grade 1 starts to get at, you know, for the first time history, for the first time real geography, and how people can contribute to society. That nicely goes to grade 2, which really talks about how individual people and how groups of people can make a difference in the world. That, you know what, we're all not going to be, you know, Gandhi or a great leader perhaps, but we can all make a difference. And that's a key theme in grade 2. Grade 3, we would recommend teaching about Connecticut and local history. And it's important to know, sure, we want to know some of the history of the state and what's going on in the state and, you know, the culture and the economy of the state today. But I think equally important is how about your own community? How about the community that your students live in, or communities in some cases if it's a magnet school? But we want, well, wow, we drive by this factory every day. What do they make there? So I think the state content is important, but equally important is local connections and local history. Grade 4 is geography, US geography, and we've divided it by regions. But I think the important thing is it's not just geography, but we want people to do human geography as well. Who lives in each region? Why do they live in each region? Why do people move between regions? So, yeah, I think geography on its merits is one thing, but how that geography influences the action of humans is equally important. We want people in elementary schools. We're hopeful that in elementary schools that people will up their game, that districts and schools will decide to do more in social studies. We're suggesting in grade 5 that there's a real legitimate look at that first era of American history, which goes to initial settlements and initial migrations to the continent, all the way up through and a little past the American Revolution. There's topics, by the way, there's novels, there's all kinds of educational materials that can make that era of American history really important, engaging for elementary school students.
Hey, Steve, before we move on to the next grade level band, I was hoping
Sure.
you might tell us what's the recommended amount of time, let's say, for social studies at the elementary level?
Well, can I tell you the districts that do it well, I mean, I make the judgment that do it well. They talk about, there's districts that have 3 days a week of 40 minutes in a class for social studies.
Mm.
And, I know that there's scheduling issues, but there's districts that make this happen. And there's more districts that are trying to make it happen. So I think there is a recognition that you have to give set alone time for a topic.
Yeah.
That if we want, and I don't mean to make this sound disrespectful, but to say that we're doing social studies at the elementary level has to be more than we're just reading a social studies book. And it has to be legitimate study of social studies content and social studies themes.
Thanks for that. I've been doing some research and it's showing that social studies at the elementary level actually increases literacy scores. I know that's a big.
Oh, there's
concern for a lot of teachers.
absolutely that when kids are reading there's specific research on that when kids are reading social studies stuff, that it enhances their literacy, it enhances literacy skills. So yeah, the evidence is pretty clear on that. Grade 6 and 7 are regional studies, and the way that the standards are structured is if your district, here are the topics. If once you get a look at the standards, if your district wants to take 6 and 7 in a thematic way, which some districts do, these standards allow you the possibility to do that. If you want to take regional studies the regional way, like in grade 6, we're going to study these regions. In grade 7, we're going to study these regions. These standards will allow you to do that as well. So it's not, but I think different districts do it differently. And there's an effective way to teach both. And we could have further discussions on why to do one or the other. But we want, people have made a criticism some people in reviewing of this, well, where's the world history? Where's the ancient history? We would say, if you're doing regional studies, do history, but do the history that helps explain the region today. You know, we think that looking at these regions from a modern perspective is perhaps in the long run more meaningful than focusing all of a student's attention on ancient history. We think there's a place for ancient history, but put your focus, if you're doing it regionally or thematically, on those regions today. Grade 8, and this is fairly standard in the schools that I know in Connecticut, is sort of U.S. history that takes students through the Reconstruction era and perhaps slightly beyond. This era of the new nation, the expansion of the new nation, and events leading to the Civil War and Reconstruction. And you know, I think, you know, there's high school teachers I've heard have said, well, you know what, we have to teach the whole thing in the high school. You know, we can't, but they're very respectfully to that viewpoint, I'm not sure you have the time to do that. That I think, and I mean that without any disrespect to any district that's doing that, you know, that approach. But I think at this point, to really get at the themes of American history, you have to divide it up. You can't start, you know, in high school again from the American Revolution or something like that. We have to rely on our colleagues in the middle school and in the elementary school to do some of that work in U.S. history. And then in high school, you know, people are asking, well, you know, where is, you know, ancient Mesopotamia in this? Our people are, and this was back in 2015 as well, don't think in world history that you can go all the way back. So we're focusing on modern world history. And I would emphasize strongly that if we're going to call it world history, let's teach it as world history. You know, let's not teach European history and pretend that we're teaching world history. You know, and have our only connections with other parts of the world is when Europe happens to come in with them. We have an obligation not to teach just European history. We have an obligation to teach, especially in our global era today. We have an obligation, if we're teaching world history, let's teach world history. And our standards will give you a pathway to do that. I think U.S. history, our third part, again, we would suggest mid to late, you know, after the Civil War is a place to start. And, you know, I think teachers have to make some choices. You know, the average U.S. history class in Connecticut, the best that I've been able to research, it gets maybe to Vietnam or Ronald Reagan. You know, that's an average in Connecticut. And if your district gets farther than that, good for you. But you know what? If we want to make history relevant to students, if that's a goal, and I hope it's a goal for everybody here, we have to get to closer to the present day. Because you know what? To respectfully, again, to those of you that are doing this, if you're only getting to Vietnam, Vietnam is not to a student, a high school student today, that's old history. Now, the beauty of these standards is making some relatively tough choices. I'll agree with that. But you know what? Getting history, getting us to the present day, if that's a goal that you'd like to get to and you'd like to do in your district, these standards provide you a path to do that. And finally, in civics and government, this is a course that it's harder to teach this today. That there's there's topics in this course that are challenging. There's topics in this course that maybe in some cases are uncomfortable to be teaching in 2023. But I think the work that's been done on how you structure a government course, a civics course, how you promote political participation and engagement. I think the standards do a nice job on that. And the standards, when we're talking about political participation, and we're talking about in inquiry, taking informed action, what a job of a high school social studies civics teacher is to give the students the tools to be engaged. It's not our job, in my opinion, and I know the group's opinion that wrote these, it's not our job to tell the students how to be engaged. Don't say you should go to this rally or you should get involved in this movement. That's up to the students. But to give them the tools to be able to be engaged in a way they think is appropriate, that's the job of civics. That will be shown in these standards. And I think that's largely a major goal of all of American education in civics. So do we want to be able to promote active citizens? Absolutely. I'll repeat myself. How they're active is their call. Our job is to give them the tools to engage in that activity.
All right, just a little bit about the content standards themselves. This we're looking at here is history, and if you want to pause it and read each one, I recommend that you do that. But really what we're just trying to do here is illustrate how the content builds over the course of the K-12 articulation. So in the earliest stages up here in grade 2, contributing society, and you're working together. Basically, this is looking at like comparing the needs of community members. Whereas in grade 5, what we're doing here is we're looking at conflicting views, so perspectives, right? And you can see here at the top in the purple, it says perspectives. That's what this is really working on. By grade 8, we are looking at the factors that influence perspective. So we're getting into historical empathy, and then continuing with that historical empathy, looking at the US history level, we're looking at analyzing complex and interacting factors that influence strategies. So what are the things that are influencing the choices that people are making in the historical period? Looking over here at civics, this is about processes, rules, and laws. For grade 2, in contributing to society, we're looking at how people have tried to improve communities, and then move down here to grade 5, where we're looking at how individuals and groups in the revolutionary era, have affected change. And then we're looking at in grade 8, comparing the movements for social change. And then finally, at the US history level, we are looking at the historical context of racism, racial terrorism, and challenges to reconciliation after the Civil War. Looking at geography, again, this is human population. We're looking at, how and why people and goods move. And then for grade 4, we're looking at the environmental and cultural characteristics that shape movement. And then grade 7, we're explaining how changes in transportation have led to connections among human settlements. And then finally here, modern world history, we're looking at imperialism and how imperialism influenced migration patterns. So you can see each time it's getting a little bit more complex. And then finally here with economics, where this is the national economy, we're looking at examples of goods and services, explaining how services and communities are paid for by taxes. And then in grade 7, we're looking at the economic fluctuation cycles that have to do with like deflation, inflation, unemployment, depression, recession. Again, that's happening at the 7th grade level. And then finally, at the 12th grade level, we're looking at, at the US history level, we're looking at laissez-faire economic policies and how that influences corporate decision-making and labor conditions. So you can see the skills are getting more complex as we go from K all the way up to 12.
Could you just discuss for a second what the role of the EGs are? Are these like must
Sure.
learns? Are these examples? Could you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. So you see here with the examples, really, they are, it's not an all-inclusive list or a list, it's not every idea that you could come up with, but these are content suggestions, things that you could look at in your classroom, as long as it makes sense for the students that you are working with, and especially if you're looking at these geography ones in grade 7. We just listed out something from the United States, something from North America, the Panama Canal, looking at something in Africa. These are just 3 different regions that you could look at. You don't necessarily have to, but these are examples that kind of are illustrative, right? They give you an idea of the right direction to go in. Could these turn into lesson objectives or specific topics that you're learning in class? Oh, for sure, they definitely could. But again, these are just recommendations and they're not an exhaustive list. They're just a list to kind of help you get in the right direction.
And teachers might even have others that could fit in an EG category, correct?
You might have others that fit in an EG category for sure. Especially if you look at this one for grade 2 in the Civics 14. We just listed green spaces, safety laws, zoning, affordable housing. Those don't necessarily need to be the only examples of how people have tried to improve communities, but these were just some ideas of how people have tried to improve communities that has to do with decision making that also fits into this idea of contributing to society. So if anyone's interested in more information about professional learning that we have coming up, we have some wonderful resources for folks. Of course, you could go to ConnecticutSocialStudies.org. Again, that's ctsocialstudies.org. It's at the top of your screen there. That's where you're going to find information about upcoming meetings and workshops and webinars. Also, if you're looking for something that's a little bit more asynchronous, we have our YouTube channel. You're probably viewing this right on our YouTube channel now, so you already know about that. But also we have our podcast, which is available on our website, but it's also available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and a variety of other podcast locations. Aside from that, I think that's pretty much it for the session. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to us here at ConnecticutSocialStudies.org, or you can reach out to Steve at the State Department of Ed, and we look forward to working with you as you engage in your process of rolling out the standards in your districts and classrooms. Thank you so much.